is the Leon Charney Report. And now, here is your host, Leon Charney.
Welcome. It's another Leon Charney Report. It's 5 o'clock on Sunday in some places, other places 2 o'clock. In any case, we know you're watching because otherwise you wouldn't see me. That's redundant. We have Lally Weymouth with us, who is our resident chief correspondent, who gets more important interviews than anybody that's ever on the show, including, well, we don't even want to name names. Lally, you're jet lagged. You just came back from a terrific visit to Greece and to Turkey.
Yes, Leon.
And you interviewed two prime ministers.
Right.
One foreign minister.
Two foreign ministers.
Two foreign ministers, and
Yeah.
Mrs. Chiller.
And Mrs. Chiller,
And who's
yes.
not any kind of minister today.
Right.
Let's talk about her for 1 minute. Mrs. Chiller was the prime minister, and then she formed this coalition with the fundamentalists. And according to your interview with the prime minister of Turkey, they lost a year and a half in that country, and they're pretty angry. Is that correct?
That's correct. And she basically put her country in a very dangerous situation because the fundamentalists had only 20% of the vote.
Rafa party?
Refa party, the welfare party.
Right.
But when she took her party, the True Path Party, and made a coalition with them because they agreed to kill investigations into corruption charges against her, then she put Turkey, an enormously important country, into the hands of fundamentalists who right away started making deals with Iran, with Libya, with radical groups all over the Middle East.
Well, more importantly, they placed a lot of people in jobs, very sensitive jobs. Thousands of fundamentalists were in very, very important jobs. And I know I have a lot of involvement with Turkey. And it disrupted basically the secularization of Turkey, which is pretty dangerous.
It was very dangerous. It was
You wrote about it, by the way. You wrote about it in February, about the generals. They were going to throw out the prime minister. I forgot his name. What was
Erbakan.
Erbakan.
Well, the army did, in fact, bring tremendous pressure on the Refa, Mrs. Chiller coalition, the Refa True Path coalition, and to the point where he finally did resign in June. He could have stayed on. He basically was forced out by the army. Remind
our viewers why Turkey is so important.
Well, Turkey is a NATO country.
Right.
It's during the Cold War, it was key to the United States. And we still think it's very important because it's an Islamic country.
During the Gulf War, too.
During the Gulf War, it was crucial. It was pivotal because Prime Minister Özal gave President Bush the right to use Turkey as an air base to fly out of, and against great opposition within his country. And it cost Turkey a lot of money in oil revenues that they'd been receiving from Iraq. And it was immensely unpopular. But he was a tremendous U.S. ally, President Özal. And so they were very important in the Gulf War, as you point out, Leon. And they also can be very important as a counterweight to Iran in Central Asia.
Very, very, very important. 60 million people, I think, live in Turkey. Am I right, Molly? And 8 countries on their borders.
That's right.
Russia, Syria, I mean, you go all around the map. So they're unbelievably important. I don't think the United States pays enough attention to Turkey.
Well, there's one more thing that the United States is very interested in right now, which is the pipeline. There's oil now in the Caucasus, and it's potentially another Gulf. It may not be as rich as the Gulf, but it's certainly another oil field that's going to be a second supply for the United States. And the question is, can we run a pipeline through Turkey and then export the oil to the rest of the world? And obviously, we wouldn't want to run a pipeline through Turkey if it was a fundamentalist country.
Good point. Very good point.
So there are economic interests of the United States that are at stake here, too.
Well, that's always the case. But what's interesting is that you got these terrific interviews with these big-time guys over there, and both in Greece and Turkey. I don't know of anybody else who's done that in 1 week. Do you know anybody who's done that?
Not recently, but I think that a lot of people, to be very honest, I think a lot of people maybe weren't looking at the situation, and I think it's a situation worth looking at because in Madrid in July, Madeleine Albright really helped get what they call a joint statement issued by the Greeks and the Turks, which was the first movement, really, between the two countries in years.
For a long time.
Yes, they've been hostile, they've been enemies, as you know, and as your audience knows. But it was the first breakthrough, really. Nothing happened. It wasn't a solution. It didn't solve the various issues that remain between the countries, such as...
Is it true, Lally, that they're fighting over a rock of a piece of an island that's uninhabited?
Well, that's one of several
What's the
issues.
name?
It's called Emea by the Greeks and Kardak by the Turks. There are about 7 issues. The key issue is the continental shelf, which has minerals and possibly oil in it. And it's a question of, money and who's really the demarcation of the continental shelf, who's going to own it. But after the communique at Madrid, the United States is very hopeful that we're going to see 2 NATO allies making peace. And that the U.S. officials believe the next step in the peace process for this region is this solution of this ridiculous island called...
Who are the wise men? They have this thing called the wise men who are supposed to bring these 2 people together?
Right. The wise men are the next step in this peace process. And they're going to be 2 former diplomats from each side, i.e. 2 Turkish diplomats and 2 Greek diplomats. And they're going to meet and try to resolve, among other things, this dispute over an island which is located off the coast of Turkey.
Reminds me of Taba. Remember Taba in Israel?
Yes, I do.
It's exactly the same thing.
You're right, Leon. That's a good analogy.
So, do they have the authority of the governments, and they're working for their respective governments? These wise men?
Yes, of course. They're appointed by their governments.
So be appointed.
But yet they're not government officials. So apparently this gives the 2 governments some kind of leeway. But both prime ministers told me the Turks are very, very anxious for this meeting of the wise men. They would like to have it tomorrow. And the Greeks have been dragging their feet. But the Greek foreign minister, who I found to be the most candid of the players in the region...
Yeah, what's his name?
Pangalos.
I can't pronounce it. Okay, Pangalos.
But he was very forthright. I mean, he said, yes, the meeting with the wise men will take place, which was news in that part of the world. And the Turks, I'm sure, were very happy to hear that.
What's the history of the conflict? Aside from Cyprus. Cyprus is a big thing between them.
Yeah, Cyprus is a major problem, and our diplomat, whom you know, Richard Holbrooke, who was the person who solved the Bosnia dispute.
Is he getting into this?
Yes, he's the troubleshooter. He's been appointed by President Clinton.
When was that? Recently?
A couple of weeks ago.
Really?
Yeah.
So Clinton has George Mitchell in Ireland, Richard Holbrooke in Cyprus, and Dennis Ross still wagging around in the Middle East.
And the interesting thing is that the Clinton administration has made Cyprus a priority of their foreign policy.
Because of missiles that they have now?
No, because they think that if they solve the Cyprus issue, that it will lead to a resolution of the long-standing Greek-Turkish hostility.
I think so too, don't you?
I do. I think it's like the Middle East situation. It's a long-standing hostility, an intractable conflict. Unlike the Middle East, there has never been an Oslo process. So, it's difficult, but...
Didn't I read that Cyprus had some weapons now?
Yes, Cyprus has bought, the Greek part of Cyprus, which is recognized by the world as the official government of Cyprus, has bought missiles from Russia. And I know, it's unbelievable.
It's crazy.
I know.
It's a little fakakta country, and they're buying missiles.
I know. And then, of course, the Turks, just to make matters worse, they have a deputy prime minister called Erbakan, who doesn't really share. He's a social democrat, but he has sort of weird views. He's a nationalist, in spite of the fact that he basically, you would think of him as a leftist in many spheres. And so he marched off to Cyprus and announced that he was in favor of partially integrating Cyprus with Turkey if the Greek part of Cyprus was admitted to the European Union, which it probably will be, in fact. So, of course, that raised tensions in the area. So it's a lot like the Middle East, in fact.
It's pretty close. Cyprus 1 hour from Israel.
You can feel right at home.
They can feel at home with all this trouble.
Well, you feel right at home with the same kind of story, that one thing leads to another, and one side buys missiles, and then the other side, like the Turks told me, we'll take them out. If the Cypriots deploy the missiles, we'll take them out, the Turks told me. And I know the U.S. sent an intermediary to try to persuade the Cypriots not to deploy the missiles for that reason.
You know, the Greeks in the United States have a very strong lobby in Washington.
Yeah, you're telling me.
And they've been able to, in a sense, always defeat Turkey. Whenever there's something going on, Turkey's part of the EU, isn't it part of the Union, the Economic Union?
No, it would love to be
They
part
want to
of the
be part of the Union.
Greece is part of the Economic
Greece,
Union.
I'm sorry, I'm saying.
But Turkey is part of something called the Customs Union
Right.
of the EU.
Right.
And then when they joined this thing called the Customs Union of the EU, which is a sort of junior department
Right.
of the EU.
University.
Yeah, and we, the United States, fought very hard to get them into the Customs Union of the EU. Then the EU promised Turkey money as a result of joining this thing. But the Greeks put a block on the money that was supposed to go to Turkey. So the deal is this, that if the Turks agree that the Amea Kardak issue should go to the International Court of Justice, and the Greek foreign minister told me they don't have to take it to the International Court. They just have to say that it should go to the court.
Right.
Then the Greeks would take away their veto over the funds and release the funds. Yeah.
And what the Turks say?
Well, I think that U.S. diplomats are working very hard behind the scenes to try to work out some kind of
Modus vivendi.
Yeah, right. Some kind of ground where both sides can be satisfied. It's not easy.
Do you think there's a chance for peace between these two countries?
Well, I don't know. I think it's, in a way, a less difficult situation than Israel. I mean, you don't have bombs going off. You don't have people dying. You just have sort of long-standing hostility, and you have issues like the stupid island where they did almost go to war, actually, over this island. But it does seem, in a way, hopeful. It seems like the issue's moving, and it seems like the U.S., frankly, is doing a lot to help it move toward peace.
Your piece ran in Newsweek, international and national, both?
And domestic and international.
Really? So there's a great interest here. The editors decided that it's really important enough.
Yes, they did.
Because not a lot of people know about this. I mean, we all know a little bit about it, but we don't know a lot about it.
And the Prime Minister of Greece actually rarely gives interviews. So it was, in a way, a coup for us to get the interview.
How much time did you spend with them?
About an hour, I would say.
And what was the fundamental thing that you learned from this? They've also had trouble politically in Greece, haven't they? I mean, it wasn't so stable there for a while.
But not as, I would say the trouble that we've followed in the United States and we've been concerned with is the fundamentalist threat in Turkey,
right,
which is still really not resolved. I mean, the issue remains.
But you've pointed out 100 times on this show that it's a minority group really over there, the fundamentalists.
Yeah, but the question is, are their numbers growing? Are they going to, if they shut down this, they're thinking of shutting down this fundamentalist party called Refa. If they do that, what will the reaction be? Will people take to arms? Will it become another Algeria? People say no, but...
Do they have, the fundamentalists, do they have a strong birth rate also? Do they, or you
That's
don't
a
know?
good question. I don't know the answer
Well,
to that.
I'll tell you why I asked, because one of the questions in Israel today is the Haredim are really multiplying much faster than any other sect of the Israeli population. Now you take Jerusalem, in 20, 25 years, demographically, the Haredim, the ultra-Orthodox Jews, will be the ones who vote in those elections, so they can change the contour of a piece of a city or a country even.
Definitely.
And I would assume, I don't know, but I would assume that they have a higher birth rate than the secular, just by nature. I'm serious. I think
that's an interesting idea.
It's a really important problem, and because they're the voters. What your the Prime Minister of Turkey told you is, look, we want to be a really secular country. Ataturk was our founder. We want a circular. We want to keep education. He extended the education from
5 to 8 years.
8 years of secular education.
Right, which is
so
very important.
the fundamentalists came in and complained that you're supposed to study the Quran.
They had a riot the first day I got
right,
there.
because you're supposed to study the Quran between 10 and 12 or something like that.
That's what they say, yes.
Right. So they're the Haredim.
They were rioting in the middle of Ankara the day I got there.
You know, you're talking about religious feelings to these people. That's what they live by. And I can understand that.
And they want to impose the rule of the Quran over Turkey.
Well, it's the same in Israel. I mean, you know, they want a religious state. In Israel, they you know, Trump wants to bring a baby beauty contest. All right, it's good for the economy, it's good for Israel, but I'm sure he's going to get a lot of problems from the ultra-Orthodox community about bringing a beauty contest to Israel. And I'm not sure he can do it. And I'm sure he'd love to go to Istanbul, and he'd probably have the same reaction. It's this ultra-religious groups versus the seculars.
Amazing.
And it's the way the world is going.
Wow.
Lally, hold on. We'll come right back after break and continue with Lally, always great, and brings us these scoops of these world leaders that she always gets the first shot at. Not literally, but she interviews them. And not McLaughlin. He doesn't get it. We do.
Very interesting.
We're back with Lally Weymouth, the star reporter for the Washington Post and Newsweek, who's just come back from exclusive interviews with the Prime Minister and Foreign Minister of Turkey and the Prime Minister and Foreign Minister of Greece, and says things are hopeful. And Richard Holbrooke's now in the act. You know him. He's the fellow who's on Wall Street, but once in a while he takes off and goes to Bosnia to try and resolve the problems. And now he's in the middle of the Turkish and Turkish-Greek squabble, let's call it this one. At least they don't throw bombs. You're right. They don't kill each other. Lally, what was the reaction? Turkey is now very friendly with Israel.
Very.
And that's a strategic deal because they want to block Iran and Iraq also, don't they, in a way?
And I think it's really, although they would deny it, I think it's in large part an anti-Syria alliance.
Right. Syria's a very troublesome neighbor to the Turks. They really don't like them. Now, the Kurds...
it's home to the PKK terror movement.
Right. The Kurds are under... They have a lot of problems in Turkey also. And I read in your column that he wants to give them human rights.
Yes, that's what he said.
Yeah. You believe him?
I don't know. I guess we should see. I think
Lally's a woman who has interviewed Saddam Hussein, Hafez al-Assad from Syria. She's met every, and the Prime Minister of India wasn't that great to you, we said, remember that. She's been obviously with Bibi Netanyahu a few times. It's Robin Shimon, all the world leaders. So she's very honest. They talk to her, and she says, well, maybe. I said the same thing to Judy Miller, by the way. The New York Times reporter is a wonderful reporter, really knows the Arab world. Yeah. We were talking last week after the bombing of the two buses, and she had interviewed the leaders of Hamas. And she said they denied this and they denied that. And I said, Judy, we all have to be very careful. She says, you bet we do. You don't always take their words as gospel. Yeah. And so you're very honest the way you answer that. Because that's a tough problem in Turkey, too, with the Kurds.
The Kurds, yes. And that includes the problem of northern Iraq, of course.
How's the economy now in Turkey?
It's okay.
Really? It's better last year?
Inflation is
terrible.
Yeah.
So doesn't that give rise to a lot of problems in the country?
Yeah, well, I think the inflation problem is quite a problem.
So he said, your Prime Minister, he said that they lost a year and a half because of that other government.
I think
they couldn't put in tough economic restraints.
That's right. He's right. And I agree with him. They lost, but it was a very dangerous situation, I think. I think we, the world, are lucky that the fundamentalists are gone. And I hope they don't become more popular in Turkey.
We hope. Question, Turkey and Greece, do they have diplomatic relations?
Yeah, they do.
And when you talk to, let's say, the Greek Prime Minister about Turkey, what's his visceral feeling? Does he think they're his enemy? Does he think they can do something with them? What's his gut reaction?
I don't know.
Cautious, huh?
I would think, yeah. They're all, as somebody in the State Department said to me, they're all lawyers. They watch every word. They're very careful. They talk about the wise men or this or that. But as we've said before, it's a little bit like talking to an Israeli or, every word means something. It's a question of har homa or this or that. Same ditto the situation like in Imea Kardak. Is it going to the International Court? Is it not? Should it go? Should it not?
How about the Turkish Prime Minister? Does he have any anger towards Greece?
I don't know. I mean, I would presume they've been long-standing, foes. I would presume so, but I don't know.
Is it, as I said before, is it Cyprus really the guts of this problem, or it's other problems beyond that? That's
what the Greek foreign minister told me. That I asked him, do you think the Turkish Greek problem you can really have peace in this area without Cyprus being solved or resolved? And he said, no, you can't. There will never be a real peace until the Cyprus issue is resolved. And that, of course, I think Richard Holbrooke is going to have his hands full with that issue. Because the Greeks want to let the Greek part of Cyprus into the EU. The Turks then say they'll annex the other part. You have the missiles on Cyprus. The Turks saying they'll take them out if they're deployed. It's really not a simple problem.
No, it's a powder keg.
Yeah.
And I don't like the fact that there are missiles on Cyprus.
No, I don't
mean, that
either.
really gets me a little nervous.
Yeah.
And I would think that these people have enough problems with health and infrastructure that they could be helping their country a little bit better
you
than
would
buying
think so.
missiles.
Yeah, that would be sensible.
What do you think about this bus bombing?
I thought it was just terrible. It happened when I was in Turkey, and I just...
Was it headlines in Turkey, too?
Yeah, it was. Well, and of course, the world is such a small place now that
Right.
CNN is coming in, and you're sitting there and interviewing a prime minister in Turkey, and you're seeing this horrible thing happening in Israel. And I just thought it couldn't be more terrible. And I was impressed by Madeleine Albright's speech. I don't know about yourself.
She came down with 4 points today. Basically, mutual securitization. The only process is talking, no more. I'm paraphrasing it, but she had 4 points in her plan, and she's going over that by the end of August.
Well, she says she's going over there
Right.
if Dennis Ross has made progress this weekend when he goes over to conduct the security talks, right?
Interesting point about Dennis Ross. I was talking to a friend of mine in Israel today, and he said that his friend had been over to the United States and was shocked and surprised that no one knew the name Dennis Ross. He says in Israel, everybody knows who he is, and in Washington, I have to look at a phone book to try and find out what department he is at the State Department.
Yeah.
Now, A.M. Rosenthal was on the show last week.
Yeah. And what did he say?
He said he thinks that these guys ought to go home and a new cadre of people get into the act because they came in basically 7-8 years ago. It becomes a personal fulfillment to try and see this negotiated to the end, so you have a complete picture.
I don't agree at all with
And-
Abe Rosenthal.
Okay, so that's good. We like to have a little division here on the show. Why don't you agree?
I like Abe Rosenthal, but I think he's totally wrong. I think that I know Dennis Ross personally, and he's not a friend of mine, so I'm speaking objectively. I know Aaron Miller, his colleague,
Right.
and I think they're enormously able. And I think they've been picked on and attacked by both Israelis and Arabs, which in my view is a sign that they're probably doing their job pretty well. I think they're professionals. They know an incredible amount about the area. I can't imagine, I've heard this talk around Washington too, why don't we get somebody else? Well, it's not so simple, and it's an immensely complicated issue, as you and I both know. And everything is loaded with subtleties. Dennis knows the players, he knows the issues. I really can't think of anybody better. I think Abe is wrong.
Okay, Abe, I hope you're listening. Lally doesn't agree. She's the Washington Post, you're New York Times, and everybody comes on a Leon Charney report, so at least we get an airing of everybody's viewpoint. Do you think that the United States should get more interested in the Middle East?
Well, I think the United States is getting more interested in the United States. I was talking to a U.S. official tonight, and I told him that I understand that the feeling in the Jewish community here is that Secretary Albright's speech opens the way for the U.S. to put more pressure on both sides. That includes Israel, pressure on Israel. And I said, is this so, or is that a misreading? And he said, no, that's right, that things have changed with this speech.
Well, Congressman Charlie Rangel was on the phone with me this afternoon.
And what did he say?
He's not a lightweight. And he said the only way to stop all this fighting and all this terrorism is for the United States to get involved very heavily. And he thinks maybe, and he just threw out ideas, maybe the Secretary of Defense and high-level people have to get over there. Maybe they have to reconvene at Camp David, because he said it's just impossible. And Charlie Rangel, he has power. I mean, he's in the junior party this time, but he's been around a long time, and people listen to him.
But I get the feeling, both from talking to people in the State Department and from reading the Secretary's speech, that she intends to get involved in the Middle East right now.
Well,
now, an Israeli reporter said to me on the phone today, that they were not that optimistic about the speech because they liked what she said, but they were very pessimistic about how you were going to build trust
absolutely
between Netanyahu and...
Netanyahu's very happy with the speech because it said the things that he'd like to hear. The question is, how do you build on that speech?
Yeah, no, it was great. I mean, I thought she was very tough on terror. She said no more revolving doors, no winks, no nods, no green light to terror, no red light. I thought she was very, very tough.
I think she's very interested in the fact I think she's a little pro-Israel, and I think she wants to do what's right and really, get this thing done under her watch. I don't think she's going to be like Christopher, who ran over there every week because he didn't accomplish anything. But there's no doubt in my mind that Madeleine Albright wants to do the right thing, especially with Israel. Gad Jacobi was on the show, was the UN ambassador from Israel.
And God knew her.
God knew her very well and very friendly. Here's a wild piece of information from Charles Rangel. It has nothing to do with the Middle East, the Greek, and Turkey.
Okay, what's that?
He's trying to convince Bob Rubin, the Secretary of the Treasury, resident of New York, former chairman of Goldman Sachs, to run for governor of New York State.
Well, I think George Pataki is a pretty impressive governor. And although Bob Rubin is very ambitious and very able, in my view, I think he'd have a tough run.
But that's a scoop.
It is a scoop.
You can run it in the Washington Post or Newsweek.
It is a scoop if it's true.
It's true. Charlie Rangel told me.
Well, but does Bob Rubin agree?
No, Bob says, I don't know because it's not for me. I don't have a background, this and that. I've never done this thing. And my wife, I don't know how she'd react. She'd probably say no. So Rangel said he called the wife up.
I think Bob Rubin's very ambitious.
And the wife said, well, she didn't say no. Yeah, but according to Charles Rangel, who's on the show next week, Bob Rubin was Herculean in the way he handled the Republicans, especially Newt Gingrich, and basically that budget deal came out of Robert Rubin.
Well, everyone says that he's the second most important official next to the president.
He is, and he's very, according to Charlie Rangel, he's very, very close to the president.
But I'm suggesting to you that perhaps he better stay where he is, because I think he'll...
Suggest it to him. Bob, if you're listening, Lally says stay where you are. Don't rush to come out.
Just an opinion for what it's worth.
Well, we like your opinions.
I think George Pataki is fairly strong in this state.
I think Pataki's done a very good job in this state, and I think a lot of people love him, and he's done it in a very nice way. He doesn't shout a lot. He doesn't holler a lot. He's been very... sedate in a way that he doesn't even live at the mansion. He goes home every night to his own home. He's a real family guy, and people like him. He's a very, very pleasant guy, and he seems to be doing the right thing. You think D'Amato is on the right track now? You think he's going to win?
Well, I mean, as we know, he's going to have opposition from Schumer or Ferraro or Mark Green, right? Right.
Mark Green was on the show a couple of weeks ago, and Schumer and he are in a big battle. It's a very tough battle. Now Ferrara comes from the other side, and they say she's very popular. That's what everybody.
That's what all the political reporters say, that she would win the Democratic primary. I don't know. I think that D'Amato, once again, is an effective senator and an effective campaigner, and I think it's a big mistake to underestimate Alphonse D'Amato, which a lot of people do. But I guess we'll have to wait and see.
You think they still do?
Yeah, I think they do. His numbers are very bad. He's down in the polls. But, and I think Schumer is an impressive guy, Congressman Chuck Schumer.
What do the Turks and the Greeks think about Bill Clinton? Do they say?
I think they want to have a good relationship with the United States government, and Bill Clinton is the head of the United States.
Any reaction from the Turks and the Greeks about Bibi Netanyahu? You didn't talk about it.
Not really, but the Turks talked about their relationship with Israel and the fact they want to deepen it and strengthen it. The Prime Minister said, I think that I talked with some Israeli generals when I was in Israel, and I think the Israelis feel the same way.
Very much. I led the first Turkish delegation.
Did you, Leon?
To Israel a couple of years ago. They asked me to join them sort of as a consultant, and everybody was really raring to go. They especially want to have economic contacts, and they developed a terrific contact with the Israeli Defense Forces, especially Israel Aircraft Industries, where there's a lot of supply of munitions and the Air Force and all that type of thing. So it's really working out well. It was very tough to put together. It wasn't that simple. Sure. And they're very interested in economic ties. Turks are very good business people.
Yes, they are. Some of their leading businessmen are very impressive.
How come they don't have a bigger lobby in Washington?
I don't know, but they definitely don't. The Greeks have the lobby, not the Turks.
And they're very naive about it. They used to call me up and ask me how would they be able. I says, I can't advise you on that, but there are plenty of lobbyists around who would work for you. He was a Jewish guy. I met you with him. I think Aronson or something. Wasn't he an ambassador? Wasn't there a Jewish ambassador from the United States to Turkey?
Mortar Bromwitz.
Bromwitz.
Yeah. He's terrific.
Yeah, he was very strong for the Turks, right?
Yes, he was. He was a leading State Department official. in the U.S. government, and then he was appointed ambassador to Turkey, and he did a sensational job. He was there when President Özal was there.
So are you hopeful at the end of this? I mean,
yes, I think it.
Are you jet lagged?
No, well, slightly. But yes, I thought it was a great story because I thought it was a situation where you went to a region, which is a very important region, and it looked like, with a lot of help, I would say, from the United States, that the two countries, and as I pointed out to you, both NATO allies, both NATO members,
have a chance.
Yeah, have a good chance, and there'll be setbacks, as in Israel, but it looks like they are moving toward a more peaceful relationship,
right.
which is encouraging.
I know you have to run, Lally. Are you hopeful about Israel now, or are you desolate?
No, I think we should remain hopeful, but I think it's a very difficult situation. I was horrified to see that Arafat made a speech on Wednesday. Well, today is Thursday, and. Did you see the speech he made where they were burning U.S. flags?
He makes speeches in Arabic totally different than the ones he makes in English. The ones in Arabic condemned Jews and Israel and everything, and that's what Rosenthal was saying.
And he was calling on his
and
people.
Now there's another story out that he met with the Iraqis. And
I didn't say that.
Yeah, and they didn't want to tell the Israelis about it, but Israeli intelligence found out about it. It's one of today's stories.
Oh, because I mean the rally, the speech he made at the rally, I thought was appalling.
Well, I don't think Arafat should be doing any UJA speaking to us right now because I don't think the Jews are really crazy about him.
And he was saying we won't let Israel come into any of the cities, and it was very.
I think it's dangerous. I think it's real dangerous.
It's not the kind of thing that Arafat should be saying.
Well, a high political person that you and I both know well, and I want to mention, said that Israel is now, there's a red light blinking all the time, and it can go off at any minute. That's a tough, pessimistic view from a good source. And I wish we could leave on better news, but we'll bring you back when the process gets moving. Maybe before that. We don't want to wait.
Okay, thanks, Leon.
You're a pleasure, always. Stay tuned. We'll come back with Charles Kupchan, the Council of Foreign Relations. He'll give us his overview of not only what Lally said, but what's going on in Europe. Former Clinton aide at the National Security Council, now a scholar at the Foreign Relations Council with Leslie Gelb, I think. We'll be back. So we're back with another regular on the show, Charles Kupchan of the Council on Foreign Relations, who's an expert on Europe and other things, and is a former member of the National Security Council for President William Jefferson Clinton. He knows a lot about Bill Clinton. By the way, Bill Clinton's rating, 62%, Charlie.
He's doing well. The economy's helping him along.
Or is he helping the economy?
It's probably a little bit of both. But, a lot of this, I think, is the business cycle. A lot of it is the restructuring of American business and industry, and it's partly happened under his watch. It's partly stuff that's been in the train for a decade. But all in all, he's riding high on a very strong stock market and very strong economic performance.
Tell me, you work for Anthony Lake, right?
Yeah.
Where is Anthony Lake today?
He is about to become a new colleague of mine as of September 1 as a professor at Georgetown.
Is that right?
Yeah.
In political science?
School of Foreign Service. Yep.
He's totally out of government service.
Completely out.
You talked to him at all?
I traded notes with him about 2 months ago, just sort of welcoming him to Georgetown. He wrote me back. So.
Was he upset about his rejection, in a sense, for the nomination at the CIA?
Yeah, I think that he was, it wasn't so much a rejection as he got to the point where he couldn't take it anymore. Where he was being dragged through the coals, his staff was being dragged through the coals, and he basically said, I've had enough.
That's interesting. You've followed this Weld story, I'm sure.
Yeah.
You know Jesse Helms, for sure, right? Counsel.
I've heard of him.
You know him. What's going on? Why did Weld do this?
Weld, why did he resign?
Yeah, and tackle Jesse Helms.
One, because I think he's bored being governor of Massachusetts, and so he wanted something else. Resigning gives him a lot of publicity and visibility. Right. People are going to pay attention. And it also sets him up, I think, in terms of Republican politics, as someone who could be a contender, as a moderate, liberal side Republican. And taking on Jesse Helms reinforces his ability or his desire to carve out a moderate niche within the party. maybe looking to the presidential election.
Well, that's a good possibility. Right. Very, very tough to topple Jesse Helms, though, isn't it? He's sort of embedded in a structure that you really can't move too well.
Well, that's true, but I think that part of what's going to happen here, and who knows whether Clinton had something to say in Welles' decision, but to some extent the Republicans are going to eat themselves up again, just like they did over shutting down the government, over some of these budget issues, because people aren't going to back Helms.
We saw a crack. Richard Lugar, who's on a committee, said, I think we should give the guy a hearing.
Right.
Now, what Welles is contending is just give me a hearing.
Right.
And if Jesse Helms doesn't give him a hearing, he looks like an autocrat. He looks like a despot, like he's really a dictator.
Right. It makes him look very mean-spirited.
But he doesn't care. I understand. I was in the Senate when he was there. I mean, I worked in the Senate when he was there. He's sort of cavalier about this stuff. He doesn't care.
He's very strong-willed. He doesn't care. He thinks it's his prerogative to shut down the system by saying no hearing. Now, there are ways around it. As far as I understand, the Senate can go straight to a floor vote, even though it never went through the committee.
Right. Or they can vote. The members on the committee can vote to open it up to hearings. They don't do it. You know, the Senate has a lot of protocol. Usually they don't do it, but they can. They can overrule the chairman.
Right.
So the democratic process still works, but you got to get those people to go along with it.
Right. But I think that you'll see a lot of fighting inside the Republican Party already. Lugar, you said there was a great quote in the Times the other day from, was it maybe Dodd? Someone who said, I sent Weld a Corona beer because it's the closest he's going to ever get to Mexico. So they're already beginning to fight within the party, which is going to make Clinton look even better.
There's a rumor that Ted Kennedy was helping Weld make this decision so his nephew, Bobby Kennedy Jr., could become the governor or win the governorship. But I talked to somebody from Massachusetts the other day, and they didn't think it was a shoo-in for Kennedy no matter what happened.
Yeah.
And it's still trouble. But that's not your area of expertise, but you are an American.
I read the paper occasionally.
You follow it.
Yeah.
You follow it.
Right.
Europe is your expertise. Bosnia, Slovakia.
Bosnia.
What's going on in Bosnia?
Mess. They sent Holbrooke back to try to get the peace process moving again. But the part of the problem, and this brings us back to what we were just talking about, which is Democratic Republican Party and domestic politics, is that the U.S., partly under congressional pressure, has said we're pulling out of Bosnia by next summer. So now the parties are sitting there twiddling their thumbs, waiting
till they get out.
Yeah, and then they're going to go back to war. And the problem is that you have each of these three communities, Serbs and Muslims and Croats, they're supposed to be making nice to each other, coming back together, and it's not happening. And there was a little push about 2-3 weeks ago by NATO troops to try to arrest Karadzic and some of the war criminals. I think they arrested maybe 2 people.
But they don't get Karadzic.
And then now it's pulled back. They didn't go get Karadzic.
They can't get him, huh? Are they looking for him? Or
they could get him.
They don't want him.
They don't want him.
They make a martyr out of him?
They don't want him. Because then they're afraid that everyone's going to start shooting at American troops, at NATO troops. So there's this catch-22. They know that to normalize politics and to push it in the moderate direction, they need to get these hoodlums out. But they're afraid that if they go after these hoodlums, then they're going to radicalize the populace and they're going to get shot at, which is the last thing Clinton wants to see, is dead Americans coming home.
Should he leave the troops there, in your opinion?
In my opinion, he should go after the indicted war criminals, and he should leave American troops there. But not simply as holding the fort, not simply as keeping the lid on, because that doesn't make any sense. Either you put troops in and you press towards rebuilding communal ties across these boundaries, or you don't do it. But what we're doing now is sort of no man's land, keeping the parties apart, saying we're getting out by next July, but not really giving the parties an incentive to work toward peace.
Is that the Clinton doctrine on Bosnia?
I don't know I don't think he really has a doctorate out of Bosnia, except let's send Holbrooke back to bash some heads, which is what Holbrooke is doing there, and he's very good at bashing heads.
How's our friend Mrs. Albright doing, in your opinion?
I think she's doing real well, and she's doing
better than you expected.
Yeah,
because you thought she was an intellectual mediocre.
Well, not mediocre, but that she's not. She didn't have the creative,
right?
And she didn't have the vision that some others might have brought to the job. The one thing that she is doing very well is she's articulating. She's good on TV. The things that she has said about the Middle East yesterday and this week were clearly stated. They were forceful. When she was in the ASEAN meeting recently, she stared these guys in the face and she said, you know, this human rights stuff won't wash. She's a straight shooter.
She's tough, too.
She's tough, and I think that's important because people listen to her abroad and they listen to her at home. She's good on TV.
On a scale of 1 to 10, she'd get about an 8 from you, probably.
I think she's had a very good first.
Much better than Christopher, isn't
year. Yeah, Christopher just didn't have the persona, the public persona. Smart guy, very good at process, but the public persona was not there. She has more of that visibility. Gutsy. She's gutsy. She says what's on her mind. And in that sense, I think she's done a very good job.
And how would you rate President Clinton's foreign policy? Does he have one, in your opinion, or he's just following polls?
It's a mixture of the two. I think that my problem with the Clinton administration as a whole is there's a little bit too much poll following. And as I think one of the columnists in the Washington Post put it last week, Clinton is already and will be a great politician, but he won't be a great president. And I think what that phrase was intended to mean is that he's a great politician. He understands the system. He takes polls. He knows how to build coalitions. But does he know how to really lead with stature and gravitas? And there, you know, I think that we're seeing some back and forth. He was very bold on NATO enlargement, traveling across Europe and going to Madrid and then to Central Europe, Romania, Russia. I don't happen to think it's the right policy, but it was a very visible.
You don't want to bring in those countries to NATO?
No.
Why?
Well, today I actually think it's too late to stop. So I'm no longer fighting it.
Why did you think it was no good?
I don't think it was any good because it doesn't achieve much and it causes a lot of problems. To say you get Poland, Hungary, Czech Republic in, but those countries were pretty much over the hill anyway.
But doesn't that help them economically? Does not?
Not much.
You don't think so?
Not much.
I know a lot of people are investing in Czechoslovakia, Czech now Republic. A lot of
but they were doing that a year ago.
But what they were doing in order to enhance people come over and say, look, we're going to be part of NATO now.
It won't hurt, but the question is the gain to security in that part of Europe, in the center, worth all the trouble that we're creating?
Why?
With Russia, with those countries left out, with the American people? You know, this has to be voted on next summer. 2/3 of the Senate has to say yes. It's going to be a big fight. I think it will pass. I think it should pass, because to reverse it at this point would be much more costly than going ahead. But I think there were ways that we could have brought Poland, Hungary, Czech Republic in without this kind of dividing line.
How?
Create new institutions. There was this thing called the Partnership for Peace, which was gradually, quietly bringing these countries in. They didn't like it. They want American troops. They want this commitment. But I think we spent last decades fighting the Cold War with tanks and guns and tank traps, and now we're, to some extent, we're going back to use a military alliance to do something that should be done with a different sort of instrument, the European Union.
But hasn't he transformed NATO in a sense to like an economic alliance? I mean, is it strictly a military alliance still?
It's moving in the right direction. It's moving in the right direction in that it is less focused on protecting against a Russian invasion, more on bringing in these countries to a joint multilateral military command structure, making them feel like they belong in the West, and probably most importantly, it's getting countries that want in to be nice to each other. Hungary signing deals with Romania.
That's good.
Right? The Slovak community in Hungary being protected and vice versa, because they know that if they don't behave, they're not going to get in. And that's good.
So Clinton gets a 6 from you.
Yeah, I'd say that he's done well in terms of getting certain policies on the table. I think it's good that he's finally stepped forward on the Middle East peace process rather than hanging back. Well, I am not as bullish as some people about what can be done from Washington. I'm pretty pessimistic because we could jump up and down. We could threaten to pull aid out of Israel, which we won't do. But we could do this. And the bottom line is, if Netanyahu and the government there and the Palestinians don't want to make peace, it's not going to happen. We can't make it happen from Washington. So yes, let's send Dennis Ross, let's send Madeleine Albright,
Did you hear my discussion with Lally about Dennis Ross?
Yeah.
And what A.M. Rosenthal said about it, and she totally disagrees with him. What's your opinion?
He cut into Ross?
No, he didn't. He said that what happens is you become so embedded in these problems after such a period of time that basically it becomes your problem to finish, and maybe it's not the right time to finish or on those conditions.
Right.
So in a sense, it becomes a personal agenda to complete something that you worked on all the time. So it's better to leave, to do a stint, and then leave and get out.
Yeah, that may be true, but I don't think that a different person would make much difference. I think the problem is
The people.
the election, the terror attacks after Rabin's assassination that swung the Israeli electorate towards the right and that voted in Netanyahu with a very right-wing coalition that really isn't interested in peace and trading territory for peace. And on the other side, you're seeing the extremist elements within the Palestinian community gaining strength. And so I think the problem is that you're now seeing a politics, an internal politics in the Middle East that's moving towards blockage and extremism, and there's not a whole hell of a lot that I think the United States can do. That doesn't mean we shouldn't try.
Can anybody do anything? That's the question. You know, when we're talking, I know what you're saying. Basically, there's a right wing of the Palestinians, the right wing of the Israelis, and the center really wants peace, both centers, the Palestinian center and the Israeli center.
Right.
But how do you convince the Haredim and the ultra fundamentalists, or the fundamentalists in Palestine, or Palestinians, to come together? I don't know how you do that.
You don't. What you try to do is build a strong coalition around centrist policies.
But then you have terrorism and bombings and suicidal things.
And that's why getting control over the terror is so important. Because if the peace process were to get moving again, all you need is a few more bombs in Machane Yehuda, and suddenly the Israelis would say, forget it, let's seal off the West Bank, and we're not moving forward on the peace process.
Somebody wrote that there's a perverse joy in some Jews when this stuff happens, not for the killings or not for, God forbid, any of the lives that are shattered, but the fact that it stops the peace process. And these people don't want to see the peace process go forward.
No, they don't. That's why they let the bombs off, because they know that it will scuttle.
Stops it.
It stops it. It stopped it perfectly with the Perez government.
You believe that Arafat can control that?
I think that he could do more, but I don't think that he can eliminate it. I mean, let's look at the facts of the case are that it's not in Arafat's interest for terror attacks to occur. It erodes his power base. It makes him look like he's out of control. The question is, how does he break up these terror cells? How can he get control of the extremists within the Palestinian community? And I think that's very hard. And one thing he can do is get much better cooperation with the Israeli security. And right now, the Palestinian Authority and the Israeli security are not talking to each other.
They want to arrest the police chief of the Palestinian Authority on the grounds that he's been not that kosher in terms of his dealings, and he may have ordered some assassinations. We don't know.
The reports of corruption within the Palestinian leadership are terrible.
You can't get any funding to the people. It always goes to the middlemen. And a lot of middlemen. Palestinians have created a lot of good middlemen.
That's right.
We'll be back after a break, continue with Charles Kupchan, our scholar from the Council on Foreign Relations, who's teaching us a little bit about the world. We'll check in on what Tony Blair is doing. He follows him very strongly. I know he did a central bank in England, which seems to be working, but they raised the rates. We'll be right back. We're back. We're speaking with Charles Kupchan, a former member of the Clinton administration, although only for about a year, I think. And then on to the Council on Foreign Relations, and a professor at Georgetown University, and a real scholar, and been with us a lot, knows the world inside out. Tony Blair, interesting guy, isn't he, Charles?
He's done well. He has completely revamped the left wing in Britain, moved it from a party that was basically in the pocket of labor unions, anti-NATO, for use of force, and is now a very centrist party, which is not much different from the Tories, from the Conservatives in terms of economic policy.
He's the Bill Clinton of England.
Basically. They both took their parties that were tended to be left and they moved it to the center, and they cut one big highway that took most of the Democrats and a good bit of the Liberal Republicans, or the Conservatives in the British case, and a lot of the real hard work was done by Thatcher. She's the one who pushed the British economy in the direction of privatization, deregulation. And that's why Britain's economy, if you look at Europe today, is doing better than anybody, much better than the Germans.
Right, terrific. Germans are in trouble.
Right.
What happens when the Germans get in trouble?
Well, we don't want to talk about that, Leon.
I know.
But
it's not a funny item either.
No, they are tackling some of the big problems that they have to tackle, which is that they have a form of capitalism that really isn't capitalism. It's this kind of
social
inbred links between industry and finance. They have a welfare system that is way overbloated, and that is simply, it's going to bankrupt the state if you look at the numbers. There's going to be one German worker for every pensioner in the year 2020. They can't continue the welfare system. But to get rid of it, to introduce monetary union, to move the economy in the right direction, it's going to be painful. And that's why we're seeing the socialists who just won in France, and that's why we're seeing even Kohl, the guy who's been in office for 15 years now, his ratings are going down.
Yeah, he's in trouble. And he was the Iron Man of Germany.
He was the Iron Man of Germany. He still has a huge amount of political authority and moral authority. The problem is that he has attached his political fortunes right now to one issue, and that's the single currency.
It's not going to win.
And the problem is that if he pushes to stick to the criteria for who gets in, nobody's going to get in. Maybe Luxembourg will have single currency and no one else. If you broaden the criteria so France can get in, Germany can get in, other countries can get in, then you start worrying about, is the euro, the new currency, going to be stable? Is it going to lead to inflation? And Germans don't like inflation.
No.
Reminds them of the 30s.
That's right. They have a good right not to like it.
That's right.
Did you follow the budget deal now with Clinton and find out how he treated foreign aid? Have you people looked at that over there?
I didn't. I don't know exactly what the numbers are. I know that foreign aid has been under pressure really since the beginning of the Clinton administration. Less because Clinton wants to cut it, but then because Congress has been pressing to cut it.
But you don't know exactly what
I don't know where it came out. I don't know where the numbers came out.
The biggest recipients of foreign money are Israel and Egypt in the budget?
Yes.
And that probably will continue.
I think it will continue.
Although there's a feeling in Israel that there are some people in Israel who like to see that brought down a little bit. They feel that Israel is becoming Americanized. You know, McDonald's is more important than Shlomo's hot dog stand in Petach Tikva, and they don't like it.
And they don't want the dependency on American aid.
It's too much Americanization. You listened to Lally Weymouth before. Have you followed that region at all, Turkey and Greece?
A little bit. I mean, I'm less optimistic than I think Lally and some of the things that she's written that we're really moving towards a major breakthrough there. In part because if you look at the areas where we've had breakthrough, a lot of it was that you had opposite sides that were fueled and paid for by the Cold War. One side was pro-Soviet, one side pro-West. Greece and Turkey were both in the West. Neither was Soviet. So the end of the Cold War didn't do much for them.
Right, interesting, yeah.
I mean, why did the peace process move forward in Israel? Partly because the bottom fell out.
Russia fell out.
No one was paying the PLO anymore.
No one was paying Syria.
Right.
They couldn't get ammunition.
Right.
They had to go to Iran.
Exactly. And look at Angola.
That's a good point.
Southwest Africa, the same thing. Who's going to support?
So what drives that antipathy in between Greece and Turkey? Other than
That's a lot of it is age-old, deeply ingrained emotional antipathy. There's
Bosnia type things, huh?
Yeah, although I don't believe in this ancient hatred stuff. But you do have, in the case of Greece and Turkey, these thorns, Cyprus, other islands that are disputed. The one thing that I think does work to the advantage of peace process is I think Greece and Turkey are afraid that they, to some extent, are going to get left behind. Because, for example, NATO is now expanding, as we were talking about. The action is in Poland, Central Europe. And they say, wait a minute, we're going to get kind of left in the dust here unless we get our house in order. And the southern flank of Europe is still important because it's close to Iraq, and we still use Turkey as an air base and those sort of things. But I think that there's a sense that there isn't going to be as much tolerance for Greece and Turkey slapping each other around as there used to be.
You heard about the rumor I discussed before with Lally that the Arafat met with the Iraqis. Did you hear anything about that?
No, I didn't hear that part.
That could be a very dangerous thing, couldn't it? if it's true. I think it is true. Otherwise,
That he recently met with them?
yeah, I think it was last week, and the Israeli security people found out, intelligence people found out about it. The Arafat's standing in Europe is still strong, though, isn't it? They sort of he's a de facto head of state, isn't he?
And there continues to be this kind of undercurrent, especially with the French, but with Europeans in general, of having a separate relationship with Arafat and a separate weight and influence in the Middle East. The French are always upset that the U.S. is the big macher in the Middle East. Right. They want to be in there too.
They always send the foreign minister of the European Union over to check it. Charlie, we're out of time. The one thing I can tell you is I think the Bosnia situation is not running away. The Turkish-Greek situation is not running away. And unfortunately, the Middle East is going to be muddled.
We'll have plenty to talk about next time.
We'll be back. We'll see you next week with not Newt Gingrich. We're trying. I always say.